A boarding pass is supposed to be a promise, a simple piece of paper that says you belong here. But for 17-year-old Zoe and 16-year-old Maya Washington, their first-class tickets to New York felt more like an accusation. Standing at the chaotic gate at LAX, dressed in comfortable Stanford hoodies and leggings, they were met with a wall of ice in the form of a gate agent who saw two black teenagers, not two paying customers. She snatched their passes, her voice dripping with suspicion, and publicly declared they were in the wrong line. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a humiliation. And what happened next would ignite a firestorm that would travel from the airport gate to the highest corporate boardroom, proving that sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest thunder. The air in LAX's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony of chaos. The low hum of thousands of conversations, the rhythmic click-clack of roller bags on polished floors, the distant garbled announcements of flight departures. It was the sound of a world in motion. For sisters Zoe and Maya Washington, it was the sound of adventure. Zoe, at 17, possessed an energy that seemed to barely be contained by her skin. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, missed nothing. She was the family's debater, the one who questioned everything. Her mind a whip-smart processor that was already 3 steps ahead in any conversation. She was headed to a prestigious summer coding immersion program at Columbia University, a capstone to a high school career that had already seen her build 2 fully functional apps. Maya, a year younger at 16, was her sister's quiet counterbalance. Where Zoe was a storm, Maya was the calm, deep ocean. She was an artist, a keen observer of the human condition, her sketchbook filled with startlingly perceptive portraits of strangers she saw in cafes and airports. Her destination was a young artist's workshop at Pratt Institute. Their futures were bright, incandescent even, and this trip was the first taste of the East Coast independence they both craved. Their father, Robert Washington, had insisted they fly first class. "It's a long flight," he'd said with a warm smile. "You've earned a little comfort. Stretch out, watch some movies, and land in New York ready to take on the world." He was a man who believed in rewarding hard work, a principle that had guided him from a scholarship kid at Caltech to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar renewable energy firm, Solara Innovations. Dressed for comfort on the 6-hour flight in matching charcoal gray Stanford hoodies, a nod to their shared dream school, leggings and pristine sneakers, Zoe and Maya navigated the throng toward Gate 42B. The flight to JFK was boarding soon. The pre-boarding announcement for military personnel and families with small children had just finished. "Okay, Group 1, we are now ready to begin boarding," a crisp, slightly strained voice announced over the loudspeaker. "That's us," Zoe said, nudging Maya and grabbing the handle of her sleek carbon fiber carry-on. They joined the short assembling line, a mix of seasoned business travelers in tailored suits and wealthy-looking couples in quiet luxury attire. The sisters, with their youthful energy and comfortable clothes, stood out. They didn't notice, lost in their own bubble of excitement, debating whether New York pizza was truly superior to Chicago deep dish. The gate agent at the podium was a woman in her late 40s named Caroline Finch. She had a severe blonde bob that looked like it had been sculpted from ice, and her thin lips were pressed into a permanent line of disapproval. She scanned each boarding pass with an air of profound skepticism, as if she were personally vetting each soul-seeking entry into the sanctum of first class. The businessman in front of them, a portly man in a rumpled suit, was waved through with a curt nod. Then it was Zoe's turn. She stepped forward, a bright smile on her face, and held out her phone with the digital boarding pass displayed. Caroline didn't look at Zoe's face. Her eyes flicked from the screen, up to Zoe's hoodie, down to her sneakers, and then back to the screen. A tiny, almost imperceptible sneer tugged at the corner of her mouth. "I'm sorry," Caroline said, her voice loud enough for the people behind them to hear clearly. "The line for general boarding hasn't been called yet. You'll need to step aside." Zoe's smile faltered. She blinked, confused. "Oh no, we're Group 1. It says right here." She tapped the screen, pointing to the bold Group 1 designation next to her name. Caroline let out an exaggerated, impatient sigh. Honey, I can see what it says. Sometimes the app glitches. Now please, there are other passengers waiting. She made a shooing motion with her hand, a gesture one might use on a stray cat. The word honey landed like a slap. Zoe's back stiffened. It's not a glitch, she said, her voice losing its warmth and gaining a hard, clear edge. My ticket is for seat 2A. My sister is in 2B, we're in first class. The line behind them was growing. Faces were turning. A man in a crisp blue shirt, Mr. Peterson, craned his neck, a look of annoyed amusement on his face. He clearly wanted the perceived holdup to be resolved so he could get on the plane and into his pre-departure champagne. Caroline took Zoe's phone from her hand, her fingers smudging the screen. She squinted at it, then at Maya, who had stepped up beside her sister. You too? She asked, her tone a cocktail of disbelief and accusation. She looked them up and down again, more slowly this time. The hoodies, the leggings, their youth, their race. The unspoken question hung heavy and poisonous in the air. How could you possibly belong here? Yes, us, Maya said softly, her artist's eyes capturing the woman's pinched expression, the subtle tightening around her eyes. Maya felt a familiar cold knot forming in her stomach. It was the feeling of being seen not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. I'm going to need to see some identification. And the credit card used to purchase these tickets, Caroline demanded, her voice rising in authority. She was performing now, playing the part of the diligent protector of airline policy for the audience in the queue. Our ID? Zoe's voice was sharp with indignation. You didn't ask the man in front of me for his ID. You didn't ask anyone for the credit card. Why are you asking us? Standard procedure for a random security check, Caroline snapped, the lie thin and brittle. If you can't provide the documents, you'll have to wait until boarding is complete so I can verify your seats. Now step aside. Humiliation washed over the sisters. It was hot and prickly. People were staring openly now. Mr. Peterson scoffed audibly and muttered to the woman behind him. Can you believe the nerve? Probably trying to use their parents' frequent flyer miles. Tears of frustration and anger welled in Zoe's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was not a crier. She was a fighter. This is not random, and you know it. You saw us and you made an assumption. This is ridiculous. Are you calling me a liar? Caroline's voice went shrill. Young lady, I can have you removed from this gate area for causing a disturbance. Security! She didn't actually call them, but the threat was clear. Maya put a calming hand on Zoe's arm. Zoe, just wait, she whispered. Her gaze drifted past the gate agent, past the line of impatient, judging eyes, toward the corridor leading to the main terminal. Caroline, sensing victory, smirked. Listen to your sister. Now for the last time, move out of the line. She turned her attention to Mr. Peterson, flashing him a look of shared exasperation. My apologies for the delay, sir. You can go ahead. Zoe and Maya stood frozen, pushed to the side of the podium like discarded luggage. The line of first-class passengers began to move past them, a parade of averted eyes and subtle glares. Each person who walked by was another small cut. They were invisible and hypervisible all at once. They were trespassers in a space they had every right to occupy. The promise of their adventure, the excitement that had buzzed between them just minutes before, had curdled into shame and rage. They were about to turn away, defeated, when a calm, deep voice cut through the noise of the terminal. It was a voice that carried an effortless authority, a voice accustomed to being heard. Is there a problem here? Zoe and Maya turned. Walking toward them was a tall, impeccably dressed black man. His suit was a custom-tailored navy blue, his shoes shone with a quiet gleam, and his presence seemed to create a sudden pocket of silence around him. Caroline's head snapped up. Her professional smile, the one she reserved for high-value customers, instantly clicked into place. No problem at all, sir. Just a small ticketing issue. We'll have it sorted out shortly. Are you also in Group 1? The man didn't look at Caroline. His eyes, warm but now edged with a cold, hard fire, were locked on his daughter's. He saw the defiant glint in Zoe's eyes, the pained slump in Maya's shoulders. He took in the scene, the dismissive gate agent, the smug passenger leering at them, the two girls standing isolated and accused. He walked past Caroline, placing a protective hand on each of his daughter's shoulders. He then turned, his gaze finally falling on the gate agent. The temperature at gate 42B seemed to drop several degrees. Caroline's smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Sir?" Robert Washington looked her directly in the eye. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The power in his quiet words was absolute. "I asked if there was a problem," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Because it seems to me you're refusing to board my daughters." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, then delivered the final devastating line. "They're with me, they're my daughters." The silence that followed Robert Washington's words was profound. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the ambient noise out of the terminal. The beeping of the scanner, the rustle of jackets, the low murmur of the waiting crowd. It all ceased. For a moment, gate 42B was a frozen tableau. Caroline Finch's face went through a rapid, disastrous series of micro-expressions. First, confusion, as her brain tried to reconcile the man in the $5,000 suit with the girls in the Stanford hoodies. Then, a dawning, horrified comprehension. Finally, a sickly pallor washed over her features as the full gravity of her mistake crashed down upon her. Her professionally plastered smile melted away, leaving behind a slack-jawed panic. Mr. Peterson, the smug businessman who had been enjoying the show, physically recoiled. His eyes darted from Robert's stern, powerful face to the girls he had just dismissed, and a flush of crimson crept up his neck. He suddenly found the scuffed toes of his loafers intensely interesting. Robert kept his hands firmly on his daughter's shoulders, a silent, unshakable anchor. He hadn't taken his eyes off Caroline. I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice suddenly a full octave higher. There's been a misunderstanding. I was just, performing a standard security, a random..." Her words trailed off as she realized how pathetic the lie sounded now. The excuse that had seemed so powerful when wielded against two teenage girls now disintegrated under the gaze of this man. "A random check," Robert finished for her, his voice devoid of any warmth. "The kind of random check that only seems to happen to certain people. Is that the policy of Aura Air, Ms.?" He leaned forward slightly, his eyes dropping to her name tag. "Miss Finch." The use of her name made her flinch. No, of course not, Mr. Washington, Robert Washington," he said. He then turned his attention to Zoe and Maya, his expression softening instantly. "Are you two okay?" Zoe just nodded, her throat too tight with a mixture of vindication and residual anger to speak. Maya leaned into her father's touch, a silent confirmation. The shame that had been burning her cheeks began to recede, replaced by the profound comfort of her father's presence. He was their shield. Robert turned back to Caroline, whose hands were now trembling as she fumbled with the scanner. "We'll be boarding now," he stated. It wasn't a request. "Yes, of course, right away, Mr. Washington, my sincerest apologies," she chirped, her voice brittle with forced deference. She scanned his boarding pass, then Zoe's, then Maya's. Beep, beep, beep. The sound of acceptance. The sound of a barrier, once so insurmountable, vanishing into thin air. As they walked past the podium, Robert paused beside Mr. Peterson, who was still trying to shrink into the background. Robert didn't say a word. He just met the man's eyes for a brief, searing moment. The look was withering. It conveyed more contempt and disappointment than a shouted tirade ever could. Mr. Peterson paled and looked away, thoroughly chastened. The walk down the jet bridge was surreal. The three of them walked in silence, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. It felt like the long, quiet aftermath of a car crash. The danger had passed, but the adrenaline still coursed through their veins. Once they stepped onto the aircraft, the hushed, luxurious atmosphere of the first-class cabin enveloped them. A flight attendant with a warm smile greeted them. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Washington. Can I get you settled? Champagne?" "Thank you, Jessica. Water for me, please. Girls?" "Just water." they both mumbled. Their seats were in the second row, plush leather pods with their own entertainment screens and ample legroom. As they stowed their bags, Zoe could feel the eyes of the other passengers on them. She recognized Mr. Peterson slinking into his seat in row 4, refusing to make eye contact. She saw others who had been in line, their faces now carefully neutral or offering small, pitying smiles. They were now the subject of intense, whispered curiosity. The two girls who didn't belong were now the CEO's daughters. The narrative had been violently rewritten, and the whiplash was dizzying. As they settled into their seats, the flight attendant returned with 3 bottles of Fiji water. Once she had moved away, Robert finally broke the silence. He reached across the aisle, taking one of each of his daughter's hands. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "I'm sorry I wasn't there with you from the start. You should never ever have to go through that." That was all it took for Zoe's carefully constructed dam of composure to break. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek. "She made us feel so small, Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Like we were criminals. Everyone was just staring." Maya, ever the observer, added, "It wasn't just her. It was the other people, too. The way they looked at us. They agreed with her." Robert squeezed their hands, his jaw tight with a barely contained fury. He wasn't just the CEO of Solara Innovations right now. He was a father, and his children had been hurt. He had spent their entire lives building a world for them, where their intelligence, their kindness, and their character were the only things that mattered. He had taught them that the content of their character was their passport to any room they chose to enter. And in the space of 5 minutes, a gate agent with a shred of power and a mountain of prejudice had told them their passports were invalid. He looked out the small airplane window, watching the ground crew scurry around below. The anger he felt was a cold, clean thing. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a tantrum, but the focused, calculated anger of a strategist. Caroline Finch was a symptom of a disease. Mr. Peterson was another. And Robert Washington was not a man who treated symptoms. He went for the cure. "This won't be forgotten," he said, his voice low and resolute. "What happened back there? It doesn't end at the gate. I promise you both that." Zoe and Maya looked at him. They had seen their father negotiate multi-billion-dollar deals with foreign governments. They had seen him command a boardroom of intimidating executives with nothing more than his intellect and his will, and they recognized the look in his eyes now. It was the look he got when he had identified a problem and was already designing the solution. The gate agent, the smug passenger, and Aura Air had no idea what was coming. They had just humiliated the daughters of a man who moved mountains. As the Airbus A321 pushed back from the gate and began its lumbering taxi toward the runway, a fragile sense of normalcy tried to reassert itself. The flight attendants performed their safety demonstration with practiced cheerfulness. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, promising a smooth flight and an on-time arrival. For most of the passengers in the first-class cabin, the drama at the gate was already a fading piece of airport theater, a bit of gossip to be shared and forgotten. But for the Washingtons, the incident was a tangible presence, sitting in the cabin with them like an unwelcome passenger. Maya had her sketchbook open, but she wasn't drawing. She was just holding the pen, its tip hovering over a blank page. Her mind kept replaying the scene, not in anger like Zoe, but with a forensic, artistic eye. She dissected Caroline Finch's expression, the subtle curl of her lip, the condescending tilt of her head. She saw Mr. Peterson's weak chin and the entitled set of his shoulders. She was cataloging the data of dismissal, the anatomy of prejudice. It was how she processed the world, by deconstructing its ugliness into lines and shades she could understand. Zoe, on the other hand, was vibrating with a restless energy. She had her laptop open, ostensibly to review some pre-reading for her coding program. But her cursor just blinked on an empty document. She was composing furious imaginary speeches in her head. She crafted scathing online reviews of Aura Air. She imagined confronting Caroline, armed with a lawyer and a lexicon of legal terms. Her anger needed an outlet, a target. It was a fire that, if not channeled, threatened to consume her. Robert watched both of them, his heart aching. He saw their distinct ways of coping, the quiet and the storm, and he felt a profound sense of failure. It was his job to protect them, and while he had arrived to end the confrontation, he hadn't been there to prevent it. He knew this experience would leave a scar, a small piece of cynicism that would chip away at the bright, open optimism he had so carefully nurtured in them. As the plane ascended, banking over the Pacific before heading east, the cabin settled into a comfortable rhythm. Drinks were served. Menus were distributed. Robert ordered a black coffee. He needed to think clearly. His mind, trained to analyze complex systems and identify points of leverage, began to work on the problem. His first instinct was purely punitive. He wanted Caroline Finch fired. He wanted a public, groveling apology from Aura Air. He wanted to pull Solara Innovations' 8-figure corporate travel account from them so fast it would leave a crater in their quarterly earnings report. It would be easy. A single, sharply worded email to his counterpart, Aura Air's CEO Alan Joyce, would set the wheels of corporate panic in motion. But as he sipped his coffee, he looked at his daughters again. Zoe was now staring blankly at her screen, the fight seeming to drain out of her, leaving behind a weary sadness. Maya had finally started to sketch, her pen moving in quick, angry strokes. He realized that simply getting one woman fired was like pulling a single weed and ignoring the poisoned soil it grew in. Caroline Finch wasn't a lone actor. She was a product of a culture that allowed her to believe her assumption was reasonable. A culture that empowered her to publicly shame 2 young women of color without fear of immediate repercussion. The other passengers, in their silent complicity, were part of that culture. Mr. Peterson was its gleeful cheerleader. Firing Caroline would be retribution. It would not be justice. And it wouldn't prevent this from happening to another 2 girls, perhaps girls who didn't have a CEO father to swoop in and save them. What would happen to them? They would be forced to step aside, their tickets possibly canceled, their trip ruined, their spirits crushed with no recourse. That was the thought that truly chilled him. His privilege had been a shield for his daughters. What about those who had no such shield? The decision crystallized in his mind. This was not a personal complaint. This was a corporate accountability issue. He wasn't going to be a customer demanding a refund. He was going to be a partner demanding a change in protocol. He pulled out his own laptop, a sleek silver machine. The clicking of his keys was quiet but decisive. He didn't open a social media app. He didn't navigate to a customer complaint portal. He opened his secure email client and began to compose a message directly to Alan Joyce. He began not with anger, but with cold, hard facts. Subject: urgent matter regarding Aura Air Flight 212, LAX JFK, and corporate partnership. Alan, I am writing to you from my seat in first class on Flight 212. I had intended for this to be an enjoyable trip for my 2 daughters, Zoe and Maya, who are flying to New York for prestigious academic summer programs. Unfortunately, their experience and mine has been anything but. He went on to detail the incident at Gate 42B with precise, dispassionate language. He named the employee, Caroline Finch. He described her tone, her specific words, honey, step aside, and her baseless demand for identification and the purchasing credit card. He detailed her escalation of the situation and the public nature of the humiliation. He mentioned the complicit silence and the audible scoffing of other passengers. He painted a picture so clear and damning that it would be impossible to dismiss. Then, he pivoted. While the individual behavior of your employee was appalling, my concern extends far beyond a single staff member. This incident is a catastrophic failure of your company's training, policies, and culture. Your gate agent felt empowered to act on what I can only assume were racial and age-based biases, turning a simple boarding process into a public spectacle of discrimination. As you know, Solara Innovations has a significant corporate account with Aura Air. We spend millions annually entrusting our employees to your care. The foundation of that partnership is not just logistics, it is a shared commitment to professionalism, respect, and integrity. Today, Aura Air violated that trust in the most fundamental way imaginable. This cannot be rectified with a simple apology and a handful of frequent flyer miles. This requires a systemic response. He paused, thinking. What was his demand? What was the move that would create real, lasting change? I will be in New York for the next 2 weeks. I expect to meet with you and your senior leadership team to discuss how Aura Air intends to overhaul its implicit bias and de-escalation training protocols across the entire company. I want to see a concrete, actionable plan that ensures no other passenger is subjected to the prejudice my daughters face today. The future of the Solara Innovations Aura Air partnership will depend entirely on the substance of that conversation. Regards, Robert Washington, CEO, Solara Innovations. He reread the email twice. It was perfect. It was not the emotional complaint of an angry father. It was the cold, hard calculus of a CEO. He had bypassed the customer service bureaucracy and gone straight to the top. He had linked the personal incident to the professional partnership, creating leverage that was impossible to ignore. He had framed his demand not as a request for compensation, but as a non-negotiable requirement for systemic change. With a final, decisive click, he hit send. The email shot out into the digital ether from 35,000 feet. On the ground, in Aura Air's gleaming corporate headquarters, a bomb was about to go off, and Robert Washington had just lit the fuse. In the C-suite of Aura Air's Chicago headquarters, Alan Joyce was having a perfectly pleasant Friday afternoon. He was looking over preliminary quarterly reports that were trending positive, sipping a meticulously prepared macchiato, and mentally planning a weekend of golf. At 4:15 p.m. Central Time, his world tilted on its axis. An email notification popped up on his screen. The name Robert Washington immediately caught his eye. Washington was not a man who sent idle chit-chat. He was one of their top-tier corporate clients, the CEO of a green energy giant that was not only a lucrative account, but also a massive PR asset for an airline trying to burnish its own environmental credentials. Joyce opened the email, expecting a note about a potential expansion of their partnership or a scheduling query. He read the first paragraph, and his posture straightened. He read the second, and the macchiato was forgotten. By the time he reached the end of the email, his face was ashen. He read it again, more slowly, the words landing like body blows. Catastrophic failure, discrimination, public humiliation, the future of our partnership. "Brenda!" he yelled through his open office door. His executive assistant, a woman who had seen him through fuel crises, union negotiations, and PR disasters, appeared instantly, her expression calm but alert. She knew that tone. It was the 5-alarm fire tone. "Get me Sarah Jenkins from PR, David Chen from Legal, and Mark O'Malley from Airport Operations. In my office, now. And get me everything we have on a gate agent named Caroline Finch at LAX." Within 10 minutes, the emergency response team was assembled in Joyce's sprawling office overlooking the city. The mood was tense. Joyce had forwarded them Robert Washington's email, and they had all read it with a growing sense of dread. "How bad is this?" Joyce asked, his voice tight. Sarah Jenkins, the sharp, impeccably dressed head of public relations, spoke first. "Alan, this is as bad as it gets. Robert Washington isn't just any CEO. He's a media darling, one of Time's most influential people last year. He's a powerful, respected black leader in a predominantly white industry. If this story gets out, and we have to assume it will, the narrative is toxic. Billion-dollar airline racially profiles the teenage daughters of a prominent black CEO. We'd be crucified." David Chen, the head of the legal department, chimed in, his expression grim. "From a legal standpoint, it's a minefield. The language Washington uses, prejudice, discrimination, is precise. He's laying the groundwork for a massive lawsuit. But the way he framed the email, he's not asking for money. He's asking for a systemic overhaul. That's smarter, and in some ways more dangerous for us. It implies a deep-seated company-wide problem, not just one bad employee. Mark O'Malley, a burly man who had worked his way up from the baggage handling crew to run all North American airport operations, looked sick. I'm pulling the security footage from Gate 42B as we speak. I've also requested Miss Finch's employee file. I need to know who this person is. A tense silence filled the room as they waited. A junior analyst from O'Malley's team soon appeared with a tablet and a thin manila folder. We have the footage, sir, and the file. They huddled around the large monitor on Joyce's wall as the CCTV footage played. It was grainy, silent, and utterly damning. They saw the two girls approach the podium, smiling. They saw Caroline Finch's body language shift, her posture becoming dismissive, aggressive. They saw her snatch the phone. They saw her shooing gesture. They saw the growing line, the staring passengers. They saw Mr. Peterson's audible scoff. Even without sound, it was obvious. They saw the girls, pushed to the side, looking small and defeated. Then, they saw Robert Washington arrive. The change in the scene was cinematic. Caroline Finch's sudden deference, her panicked fumbling. It was all there, a perfect, silent movie of corporate malpractice. "My God," Sarah whispered, her hand over her mouth. "It's exactly as he described. It might be worse." O'Malley opened the manila folder. "Caroline Finch employed with us for 12 years. Her performance reviews are average, consistently cited for efficiency, but there are notes about a customer friction." He flipped a page. "Oh, hell." "What?" Joyce demanded. 3 prior customer complaints filed against her in the last 5 years, all for rude and aggressive behavior. 2 of the complainants were black men. The other was a Hispanic family. They were all settled internally with travel vouchers and a form letter apology. A collective groan went through the room. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a pattern they had ignored. They hadn't just employed a problematic gate agent. They had enabled her. They had given her travel vouchers to smooth over her prejudice and sent her right back to the podium. David Chen, the lawyer, ran a hand over his face. "We're completely exposed. We knew we had a problem employee and we did nothing substantive. Washington's claim of a systemic failure is no longer an allegation. It's a fact proven by our own records." Alan Joyce paced his office like a caged lion. The golf weekend was a distant memory. His company was on the precipice of a disaster that could tarnish its brand for years, and as Washington had explicitly threatened, cost them one of their most valuable corporate clients. "Okay," he said, stopping and turning to face his team. "Here's the plan. Mark, place Caroline Finch on immediate unpaid suspension pending a full investigation. And by investigation, I mean the formal process of her termination. I want her gone by Monday." "Done," O'Malley said. "David, draft a letter of formal apology to the Washington family. No excuses, no corporate speak, full accountability. But do not send it. I'll deliver it personally." "Understood," Chen replied. "Sarah, you and I are going to draft a response to Robert. We will agree to all his terms, a meeting in New York, a full review of our training protocols. We will be proactive. We will be transparent. We will be whatever he wants us to be. We need to get ahead of this. Pray to God he hasn't tweeted about it yet." As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her blood ran cold. "It's a Google alert for Aura Air," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A post is starting to trend on Reddit's public freakout forum. Someone from the flight posted an account of what happened at the gate. They didn't get video of the main confrontation, but they have a photo of the girl standing off to the side, and then another of Mr. Washington talking to the agent." She read from her phone. Title: Aura Air Gate Agent Power Trips on 2 Black Teens, Gets a Brutal Reality Check. It's incredibly detailed, and it's starting to get picked up by Twitter. The team looked at each other in horror. The bomb hadn't just gone off. The fallout was already spreading. They weren't in crisis management mode anymore. They were in damage control. and the storm was just beginning. The directive from Alan Joyce's office came down like a thunderclap. By 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, Caroline Finch received a call from Mark O'Malley himself. Her tone was initially defensive, ready to paint herself as the victim of unruly passengers. "Mark, thank God you called. You would not believe the attitude on these girls yesterday. I was just trying to follow protocol and they became incredibly aggressive." "And their father." O'Malley cut her off, his voice like gravel. "Caroline, this is not that kind of call. You are being placed on immediate, unpaid suspension. A formal investigation into your conduct during the boarding of Flight 212 is underway. Do not come to the airport. A letter will be sent to you with further details. You need to contact your union representative." The line went dead, leaving Caroline in a state of stunned silence. The confidence she had worn like armor at the gate crumbled, replaced by a rising tide of panic. Suspension, investigation. Those were just corporate euphemisms for being fired. After 12 years, it was all slipping away because of two girls in hoodies. Her panic quickly hardened into a bitter, self-serving indignation. It wasn't her fault. She was the one who had been challenged, questioned. She was the victim. This belief became her mantra as she prepared for her formal interview with Aura Air's HR and legal departments on Monday. The interview was held in a sterile, windowless room at a corporate office near the airport. Facing her across a polished table were David Chen, the company's chief counsel, a stern-faced HR executive named Maria, and a union rep who looked profoundly bored. Caroline had rehearsed her story. She delivered it with the conviction of a seasoned liar. The two young women were being disruptive from the moment they got in line. She began, her voice quivering with practiced sincerity. They were laughing loudly, pushing, and when I tried to scan their passes, they were evasive. They seemed out of place. I had a duty to the other passengers to ensure the integrity of the boarding process. David Chen listened patiently, his face unreadable. "Miss Finch, you asked them for identification and the credit card used for the purchase. Why?" "It's a random security measure we're empowered to use if we feel there's a discrepancy." I felt there was a discrepancy. Their behavior was suspicious, she insisted. "What specifically was suspicious about their behavior?" Maria from HR asked, her pen poised over a notepad. Their attitude," Caroline said, struggling to find the right words. "It was defiant. When I asked them to step aside, the older one became verbally abusive. I felt threatened. I was worried she might even get physical." This was the twist. She wasn't just a diligent employee. She was a woman in peril, bravely holding her ground against aggressive teenagers. It was a vile, calculated narrative, designed to play on stereotypes and fear. David Chen let the silence hang in the air for a moment before he slid a tablet across the table. "We have the CCTV footage from the gate, Miss Finch." He pressed play. The silent movie began again. It showed Zoe and Maya talking quietly, smiling. It showed Caroline's instant dismissal. It showed their confusion, not aggression. It showed Zoe's stance, which was defiant, yes, but miles away from threatening. Most damningly, it showed Caroline's own aggressive posture, her shooing gesture, her sneer. "The footage does not seem to support your version of events," Chen said flatly. "There is no pushing, no loud disruption, and the only person displaying any overt hostility appears to be you." Caroline's face paled. "The camera doesn't pick up tone. You can't hear what they were saying to me." "We also took the liberty of contacting some of the other passengers in the Group 1 line," Maria added, her voice cold, "including a Mr. Peterson in seat 4C. He corroborated your story. He said the girls were being mouthy and disrespectful." A flicker of relief in Caroline's eyes. She wasn't alone. But her relief was short-lived. "However," David Chen continued, leaning forward, "we also spoke with a graduate student named Sarah Jensen who was sitting in 3A. She gave a very different account, one that aligns perfectly with the video footage and with Mr. Washington's complaint, an account she also posted online, which has now been viewed over 1 million times." He let that sink in. "And then there is the matter of your service record, Miss Finch," Maria said, picking up the manila folder. a 2019 complaint from a Mr. Davies, a 2021 complaint from the Al-Jamil family, a 2023 complaint from a Mr. Williams, all alleging similar behavior, all describing you as dismissive, accusatory, and hostile. All of them, Miss Finch, were people of color. Do you see a pattern emerging here? The web of lies was unraveling. The union rep, no longer bored, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He knew a losing battle when he saw one. Caroline stared at the table, her mind racing. She had been so sure she could control the narrative, that her word against two teenagers would hold up. She never counted on video cameras, on other witnesses, on her own documented history rising from the grave to condemn her. She had been caught, not just in a lie, but in a lifetime of them. Her prejudices, which she had always disguised as protocol or intuition, were now laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of a corporate boardroom. I was just doing my job, she whispered, the last pathetic defense of a cornered bigot. David Chen closed his notebook. The decision had already been made, but the process had to be completed. Thank you for your time, Miss Finch. We will be in touch. As Caroline left the room, a broken woman, she had no idea that her own personal karma was just the opening act. The consequences for the other players in this drama were just beginning to gather speed, and the ripple effects of her actions at Gate 42B were about to swamp more than just her own career. They were about to hit Mr. Peterson, the smug corroborator, with the force of a tidal wave. The story exploded online. Sarah Jensen's Reddit post was the spark, but Robert Washington's reputation was the accelerant. Tech blogs, travel sites, and mainstream news outlets picked it up. The headline was irresistible. The hashtag #AuraAirShame began trending. People who had experienced similar microaggressions or macroaggressions shared their own stories, turning a single incident into a global conversation about bias in travel. Aura Air, under the frantic guidance of Sarah Jenkins, went into full-blown crisis mode. They issued a public statement on Monday afternoon. It was a masterclass in corporate contrition. Aura Air is aware of a deeply disturbing incident that occurred at our LAX gate this past Friday. The actions described are in direct violation of our values and our commitment to treating every passenger with dignity and respect. We have been in direct contact with the family and have extended our most sincere and unreserved apologies. The employee in question has been terminated, effective immediately. We are undertaking a comprehensive top-to-bottom review of our training and boarding policies to ensure that this never happens again. Caroline Finch learned of her termination not from a formal letter, but from a CNN alert that popped up on her phone. Her name wasn't mentioned, but she knew. Her 12-year career was over, reduced to a single damning paragraph in a press release. The union couldn't protect her. The evidence was too overwhelming, the PR pressure too immense. She was a liability the company had jettisoned at cruising altitude. This was the first serving of karma, and it was brutal. But the universe was not done. Mr. Peterson, the businessman in seat 4C, had arrived in New York feeling smugly satisfied. He had backed up the gate agent, put those entitled kids in their place, and that was that. He thought his lie to the Aura Air investigator was a harmless bit of solidarity. He was, after all, a managing director at a major investment firm, Sterling Thorne. He was an important man. His opinion mattered. What he failed to account for was the internet. In Sarah Jensen's viral Reddit post, she had described the scene in vivid detail, including a smug-looking man in a rumpled suit who scoffed loudly and later lied to airline staff to back up the agent's story. She didn't know his name, but another passenger on the flight did. Someone in the Group 1 line had recognized Mr. Peterson from a business conference. A reply appeared on the Reddit thread. I think the guy you're talking about is Daniel Peterson from Sterling Thorne. I was standing 2 people behind him. That was all it took. Internet sleuths fueled by righteous indignation descended. Within hours, Daniel Peterson's LinkedIn profile was being circulated on Twitter. His corporate headshot was placed side by side with a blurry photo from the gate. The resemblance was undeniable. The digital mob arrived at Sterling Thorne's gates. Their social media pages were flooded with angry comments. Is Daniel Peterson the kind of man you want managing your money? One tweet read. Fire the racist from Sterling Thorne, another demanded. On Tuesday morning, Daniel Peterson was summoned to the office of his boss, the firm's senior partner, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance. He walked in, still oblivious, thinking it was about the quarterly projections. Eleanor's face was like granite. On her desk was an iPad open to the trending Twitter moments. Daniel, she said, her voice dangerously calm. I've been reading some very interesting things about your travel itinerary this past weekend. Care to enlighten me? Peterson saw the pictures, the headlines, the comments. The blood drained from his face. Eleanor, it's a misunderstanding. It's all been blown out of proportion. Has it? She countered, her eyes like chips of ice. Because I received a call this morning from David Chen, the chief counsel at Airline. They are, as you know, a client of this firm. He informed me that during their internal investigation, you provided a statement that was a deliberate falsehood, intended to support the discriminatory actions of their employee and malign two minors. A statement that directly contradicts video evidence. She stood up and walked to the window overlooking Wall Street. We manage the wealth of people from every background imaginable, Daniel. Trust is the only currency we have. Our clients need to know that the people in this firm are individuals of integrity and sound judgment. By publicly aligning yourself with bigotry and then lying about it, you have made yourself a liability. You have brought disrepute upon this firm. Peterson began to stammer, to offer excuses, but Eleanor Vance held up a hand, silencing him. I'm not interested in your excuses, she said. Your actions were despicable. Lying to protect a bigot is in many ways worse than being one yourself. It's a conscious act of malice. Pack your desk. Security will escort you out. Hard karma had arrived. In the space of 72 hours, Daniel Peterson had gone from a smug, anonymous passenger to an unemployed pariah. His lie, which he thought was a throwaway comment to protect a fellow traveler from a couple of mouthy kids, had cost him his six-figure salary, his prestigious title, and his reputation. Meanwhile, in a quiet hotel suite in Midtown Manhattan, Robert Washington was showing his daughters the news. He showed them Airline's statement. He showed them the articles about the firing of Daniel Peterson. Zoe read it all with a grim satisfaction. Good, she said, her voice quiet. They deserved it. Maya was more thoughtful. She looked at the picture of Caroline Finch, a stock photo from an old company newsletter someone had dug up. She looked at Daniel Peterson's corporate headshot. They looked so ordinary. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like people who had allowed a rot to grow inside them, a rot of prejudice and small-mindedness that had now consumed their lives. It's not enough, is it? Maya asked, looking at her father. Robert shook his head. No, it's not. This is just the cleanup. The real work starts tomorrow. Tomorrow was his meeting with Alan Joyce. Firing two people was easy. It was PR. It was damage control. Changing a corporate culture, that was the real fight. And it was a fight he intended to win. The meeting took place on Wednesday in a top-floor boardroom at Airline's New York office, a sterile space of glass and steel with a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. The view was wasted on the occupants, whose focus was entirely on the man sitting at the head of the table, Robert Washington. He had come alone. Facing him were Airline's CEO, Alan Joyce, and his crisis team, Sarah Jenkins, David Chen, and Mark O'Malley. The atmosphere was thick with tension and carefully managed corporate humility. Joyce began, his voice heavy with contrition. Robert, first and foremost, on behalf of every single person at Airline, I want to offer my deepest, most profound apology to you, and especially to Zoe and Maya. What happened was inexcusable. There is no defense for it. We failed. I failed. He slid a thick folder across the table. This contains our formal letter of apology, a proposal for substantial financial compensation for the distress caused to your family, and a lifetime supply of first-class travel vouchers. Robert held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. He didn't even glance at the folder. Alan, I appreciate the sentiment, he said, his voice calm and measured. But you and I both know that's not why I'm here. I'm not interested in your money. My daughters will never have to worry about the cost of a plane ticket. What I am interested in is the price of change. He leaned forward, his gaze sweeping across the anxious faces of the executives. What happened to my girls was not an anomaly. Your own records on Miss Finch prove that. It was a pattern. And that pattern exists because your system allows it to. Your training is inadequate. Your oversight is non-existent. And your culture, from what I saw at that gate, tacitly permits your employees and passengers to view people who look like my daughters with suspicion. He paused, letting the indictment settle in the silent room. So no, I don't want your vouchers, he continued. I want to see the curriculum for your new company-wide implicit bias and de-escalation training program. And I don't want it designed by a committee of your lawyers. I want it developed in partnership with leading sociologists and diversity consultants. I want it to be mandatory, rigorous, and recurring. Mark O'Malley started to speak. Mr. Washington, we are already... Robert's eyes snapped to him. You are already what, Mark? Scrambling to put a PowerPoint deck together? That's not a program. That's a Band-Aid. I'm talking about a deep systemic overhaul. I want scenario-based training using virtual reality, forcing your employees to walk a mile in the shoes of a passenger who is being profiled. I want a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior that has real teeth, not just a slap on the wrist and a travel voucher to the offended party. His gaze returned to Joyce. Furthermore, I want Aura Air to fund a multi-million-dollar foundation. We can call it the Open Skies Initiative. Its mission will be to provide scholarships and travel grants for underprivileged students of color in STEM and the arts, kids just like Zoe and Maya, so they can travel to programs and workshops that will change their lives. So that the sight of two black teenagers in a first-class line becomes so normal it's not even worth a second glance. The room was stunned. This was beyond anything they had anticipated. He wasn't just demanding they fix their own house. He was demanding they help build a better one next door. It was audacious, brilliant, and utterly transformative. David Chen, the lawyer, finally spoke, his voice cautious. Robert, what you're proposing is extensive. It has significant financial and logistical implications. Robert smiled, a thin, humorless smile. I know. So does the loss of the Solara Innovations corporate account, and the accounts of the half-dozen other CEOs in my network who I've spoken to since Friday, who are now watching very, very closely to see how Aura Air responds. This is not a negotiation, Alan. This is the new cost of doing business with me, and with anyone who believes in a more equitable world. It was the ultimate checkmate. He had leveraged his personal pain, his corporate power, and his moral authority into an unbreakable position. Alan Joyce looked at his team, then back at Robert. He saw the unshakable resolve in his eyes. He knew this was a watershed moment for his company. He could resist, fight a protracted legal and PR battle he would almost certainly lose, or he could embrace this and become a leader in the industry. The choice was clear. Okay, Joyce said, letting out a long breath. We'll do it. All of it. The training, the foundation, everything. We'll work with whomever you recommend. We will become the model for how an airline should operate. 6 months later, Zoe and Maya Washington stood on a stage at a conference for young tech entrepreneurs. They weren't there to talk about coding or art. They were the inaugural speakers for the Open Skies Initiative. Zoe spoke first, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the auditorium. An airport gate is a doorway. For us, that doorway was almost closed by prejudice. But what we learned is that when someone tries to close a door on you, you don't just knock. You find a way to take the whole building. Maya followed, her quiet presence commanding the room. What happened to us was ugly, she said. But my father taught us that you can use anything as a tool, even ugliness. We chose to use it to build something beautiful. We hope this foundation opens thousands of new doorways for kids who look like us, and that soon the only thing that will determine how far you fly is the size of your dreams. They were no longer victims of a humiliating incident. They were founders, catalysts. Their father, sitting in the front row, wasn't a CEO or a corporate titan at that moment. He was just a father, watching his daughters take their pain and forge it into a sword, not of vengeance, but of justice. They hadn't just reclaimed their space, they had redesigned the entire airport. And that was the hardest and most satisfying karma of all. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a gate agent who made a terrible mistake. It was a story about systems, accountability, and the incredible power of using your voice and your leverage for more than just personal gain. Robert Washington could have settled for a quiet apology and a fat check. Instead, he forced a corporation to confront its own reflection and become better. Zoe and Maya could have been defined by their humiliation. Instead, they transformed their trauma into a platform for others. This story is a powerful reminder that prejudice often thrives in the mundane, in the everyday assumptions made in places like an airport line. But it's also a testament to the fact that one family, standing together, can trigger a shockwave of change that makes those spaces safer for everyone. The karma that returned to Caroline Finch and Daniel Peterson was swift, but the true justice is in the legacy. A new training program, a new foundation, and a new standard for corporate responsibility. What did you think of this incredible story of justice? Have you ever witnessed something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of storytelling to inspire change, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life dramas with powerful lessons.